people will view the recording. I think it's a great program. I actually taught it for the first time yesterday to a group. So I want to make sure that I tested it out and had a group before delivering it to you all as a program that you can deliver within your counties or within the organizations and the places that you're in. And it took about an hour. I think it has a lot of great information in it, and people were really interested and they wanted to stay after. I did it for about 30 people, and people wanted to stay after and talk about some of the things that we had discussed and ask some questions for themselves. And so I thought that was a really good feedback on the program and the topics and that sort of thing. So hopefully if you decide that you want to offer this, you'll get those same results. So we will go ahead and get started. So what we're going to talk about and cover in this program on sleep is the what, why, and how of sleep. And so what does that mean? What are we going to talk about? Well, first is we want to talk about what sleep is. Where does it come from? How does it work? How much of it do we need? Why do we need it? What does it do for us? And then what happens if we don't get enough? Let me see if I can turn up my... Karim, can you hear me okay? I don't know if I have a, okay, so Karim can hear me. I have everything turned up as high as possible myself. Do you want to just get closer? Guys, is this better? Okay, I'll just get super close so that you can see my face up close and personal. Okay, and I'll try to talk loud. And then we'll talk about how can we get more of it, or what kinds of things can get in the way and what you can do about it. Because as you will see in this presentation, sleep is extremely important, and it really cuts across lots of different elements of our life that we may not realize. And so I think that it's just really important. We'll talk about those areas. And I think a lot of people just feel like, well, I get the amount of sleep that I do and there's really nothing else I can do about it, so what's the point? And I think that there's always something that we can do to either get more, or at least with what we get to get a higher quality so that we can get better results in that. And that's really the idea here. So what I want to start with is just this concept of kind of how do you think about sleep? What's your mindset around sleep? So you have these people that have this philosophy that, oh, sleep isn't that important. I'll sleep when I'm dead. So you see this in the picture on the left. Sleep is for the weak and coffee is for the strong. So people that have that mindset about sleep obviously aren't going to prioritize it. They're not going to put routines in place to get more of it. And those are the people that a lot of times will get 4 or 5 hours and just say, oh, I'm fine. Everything, I'm used to it. I perform well. And there's almost a denial piece around the importance of sleep. And so we'll talk about that because really the science shows that you don't do okay with less sleep, even though you think you might be doing okay. So we'll talk about why that is. And then you have the other extreme, which may not be as common. It is common in certain groups that I work with, but it's this concept of, I love to sleep. I try to get it as much as possible. So I love this meme of the cat. I like sleeping. It's like death without the commitment. So those are two very extremes, and maybe you fall somewhere in the middle. I don't think we want to be sleeping 12 hours a day or even more like a cat and that sort of thing. So we really just want to understand what sleep does, how much is the right amount, and then how can you frame your mindset around sleep so that it falls into the appropriate place, around what does the science show is good from a performance perspective, from a health perspective, and really thinking about it that way instead of, well, what's convenient for me? Because we really don't want to respond through convenience. We want to respond through performance and what's going to get us better results. So one of the things that a lot of people will talk about is this concept of being tired and wired, which means that they're tired during the day when they're supposed to be performing at work. Maybe they fall asleep while they're watching TV or a movie. They get sleepy while they're driving. But then by the time it's time to go to bed at night and supposed to sleep and you're finally there, you can't fall asleep and you're wired and your brain is going, the eyes are open, you're so trying to fall asleep and you just can't. And this becomes a very vicious cycle, and there are reasons for that, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to reset yourself so that you're not tired at inappropriate time and you actually become tired and sleepy at the time that it's time to go to bed. So that's one of the things that we'll be covering. Okay, so just really quickly, it's the sleep mechanism, and what causes us to sleep is extremely complex. So you don't have to know all of these different things like the suprachiasmatic nucleus or the retinohypothalamic pathway. Just know that there are a lot of different factors within the brain that are working together to regulate what's called our biological clock. Melatonin is one of those things which we will talk about in a little bit more detail. The eyes and what input your eyes get is really important, and that has implications later. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to help yourself to sleep when you're supposed to. And you're going to see that some of that is stimulated by the eye. But because this is internally regulated by the brain and through hormones, it's very difficult to bypass your biological clock. So for example, people who work the night shift, their brain does not reset itself to be on a night shift schedule where the hormones shift and support being awake at night and asleep during the day. People who work the night shift have higher risk of all kinds of chronic diseases and early death because they're actually working against their biological clock and it never readjusts itself. So that has really big implications. A lot of people think, oh, it's fine if as long as I get enough hours, even if I do it from 3 in the morning until 10 in the morning, that's fine. That's not really how it works. That's not how our brain's hormones are set. So you're going to have not as good of results when you do that. So if you just take a look here at just our natural circadian rhythms or this biological clock, you're going to see that, again, this doesn't change. So we start to secrete melatonin at 9 p.m. because our brain preparing to sleep. So you're not supposed to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning because 2 o'clock in the morning is when you're actually getting some of your most deepest type of sleep that helps to restore, helps you to grow, helps you to repair. So when you start to go against these hormones and that biological clock, you see that you may not get as good of results. So melatonin secretion starts at 9 p.m., which means that probably we're supposed to be in bed by 10 p.m. And that's okay if you can't do it by that time, but what you want to try to do is recognize that that's how the body works and try to make it as close to that as possible. If you're a shift worker and you work nights, I'll show you some things that you can do to at least lessen the bad results, although it will never be the same as following your biological clock. You'll see that melatonin secretion stops at 7:30. Now we may have to get up earlier than this, and as long as we've gotten enough sleep, it should be fine. But we're not supposed to sleep until 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. That's not how our biological clock works. So you'll see that the deepest sleep occurs between 2 and 4:30 a.m., which is really important. And you'll see in the different stages of sleep what's happening during that time. And then you'll also see a couple of other interesting pieces of information. We're most alert around 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you have the opportunity to schedule some things at 10 a.m. that maybe require high levels of alertness, that's good if you can do that. Our best coordination is at 2:30. Our fastest reaction time at 3:30. Our best cardiovascular efficiency and muscular strength at 5 o'clock. I know that I feel best when I work out somewhere between 3 and 5. Doesn't happen usually because of my work schedule, but if I can do it in the evenings, for me it's better. It doesn't always work out like that, but just recognizing that if you can work alongside your body, you get better results, and just being aware of that at least can help you to try to plan your day better in accordance with how your body works. So this is just some interesting information on the circadian rhythm. I think the stages of sleep are very interesting and I think important to understand. So I'm just going to take you through the different stages of sleep so that you can process and see what's going on as we go through these stages. So when we're awake, our brain is actually in beta waves. And so then as you go through the different stages of sleep, your brain waves actually change through each of these stages. So stage 1 should only last about 5 to 10 minutes, meaning that you should fall into a state of sleep soon after lying down and just relaxing. You shouldn't be in stage 1, in and out of that for an hour, which sometimes people are. It should be 5 to 10 minutes. It's what's called a light sleep. This is where you might have muscle twitching going on. Sometimes it wakes you up. This is where people will describe the sensation of falling and then their feet kind of jerk out. And sometimes when you wake up in this stage, you're not really sure if you were sleeping or not. It's kind of one of those weird phases where you're like, was I asleep? Was I kind of thinking about this while awake? And your brain has shifted from beta waves into alpha waves at that point. If you make it through stage 1 without waking back up, you're going to go into stage 2. And what typically happens is when you go into stage 2 and then 3 and 4 and then 5, it continues to cycle back to 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't mean that you go back to awake in stage 1. You shouldn't do that. You should keep cycling through these 2, 3, 4, and 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5 over and over and over again. So stage 2 is where you spend about half of the time while you're asleep. Everything slows down, like your brain waves, your breathing, your heart rate slows down, your body temperature drops, and now your brain moves into theta waves, or what is called also sleep spindles that you see. So that's stage 2. Then you move into stages 3 and 4. So I combine those together. You spend about 30% of the time of your sleeping in this particular stage. And this is when we call deep sleep or beauty sleep, because this is the stage of sleep in which you're restoring the body. You are repairing and growing muscles and bone. This is where you release growth hormone. They call it beauty sleep because this is where collagen is maintained and restored. So that's what would make your skin look better, and that's why they call it beauty sleep. Energy is restored. You have very slow breathing. Your muscles are very relaxed. And in the earlier part of the night, when you first fall asleep, you have longer stages of 3 and 4 and shorter stages of stage 5 because the body is prioritizing this restorative type of sleep. As you go through sleep cycles, the body then says, okay, we've restored enough here. So it starts to shorten stages 3 and 4 and begins to lengthen stage 5. And this is really important because of what stage 5 does. Stage 5 is very different than 3 and 4. 3 and 4 is very body focused. And it prioritizes, your sleep prioritizes these particular stages. And your brain is actually in delta waves in stages 3 and 4. Stage 5, which at the beginning of the night has shorter cycles, and as the night goes on, then you spend more time once the body has prioritized, or the brain has prioritized the body and making sure that it has done everything that it needs to do. We spend about 20% of the time in stage 5, and this is REM sleep. This is where your eyes move rapidly, but your muscles are paralyzed, so your muscles do not move, and this is where we have dreams. What's important about this stage is that it's really supporting memory, learning, and brain activity. So as you can see, at the beginning of sleep, it's not as important. That body takes priority, and then once the body is taken care of, then we go into these longer stages of stage 5 that focus on the memory, kind of your performance, your cognitive function. And it's going to determine how you perform the next day. And we're going to talk about some of those things. This is where the mind repairs itself. This is where it's cleansing out chemicals that, if they're not cleansed out, can lead to Alzheimer's disease, things along those lines. So if you can imagine, if you shorten your sleep time and you're only getting 5 hours, your brain is actually what misses out, because the way that sleep works is it prioritizes the body first before it goes to the brain. And if you don't get enough sleep cycles, and each one lasts 90 to 110 minutes, you're going to miss out on the later cycles, which focus on the brain, memory, learning, and performance aspects. You wake up and you're going to pay the price for that. So these are just the different stages. I think it's really important to know how they work. And of course, if you wake up during the night, a lot of times it's in the transition between stages 5 and 2. You all of a sudden wake up, and then you have to go back through stage 1 again. So once again, every time that you wake up and you have to go back into stage 1 to get back to stage 2, you're missing out on that beauty sleep, and you're also missing out on the brain restorative sleep. So that's super important as well. Okay, melatonin, I mentioned this earlier, it's part of the regulation system of the biological clock. And here's what's really important and how things kind of come together. 70% of our melatonin is actually produced in our gut, not as much as produced in the brain. And so as I talk about things related to nutrition, what you're going to see is that if you have a messed up gut is the best way I can describe it, or dysbiosis, or your gut bacteria is not balanced right, it actually reduces the production of melatonin, which can be very disruptive to sleep. So people who have gut issues, IBS, maybe food sensitivities that haven't been taken care of, maybe there's underlying leaky gut syndrome, things along those lines, those people will have a harder time falling asleep. But then the lack of sleep contributes then to a bad gut. And so it becomes a very vicious cycle. So the gut contains 400 times more melatonin than the gland in the brain that produces melatonin. So I'm going to talk about that later. So your food intake, your digestion, and the health of your gut actually affects your sleep, which is really, really important. And then melatonin also regulates the motility of your lower gut. So if your melatonin is messed up, then you can also have gut symptoms and gut issues, which can be diarrhea, constipation, bloating, a lot of gas, things along those lines. So a lot of the questions that I got after my presentation yesterday were actually related to the gut, with a lot of people having issues with the gut, and then them wondering if it's possibly affecting the issues that they have with sleep. So how long do we need to sleep? So I'm not going to ask you how old you are. So you could be between the ages of 18 and 25. And so if you are, you actually need more sleep. You're still considered to be a young adult that time, and you may need more restorative type of sleep at that age. Adults typically need 7 to 8, and as we get older, it didn't have an age on this, so you decide what gets classified as elderly. You start to need more sleep again. Although a lot of people will ask me and say, I thought older people needed less because they don't sleep as much. One of the reasons they don't sleep as much, as you're going to see, is that melatonin production gets reduced with age. And so as we age, we don't produce as much melatonin. This begins to disrupt our sleep. Disrupting our sleep is not good for us. So I do like this quote, early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. So there is this thought that getting to bed earlier just better aligns with our biological clock. And if you can get more sleep before midnight, that generally is associated with better results. So just something to think about. So let's talk about the health implications on sleep. So I love this comic because this is a lot of us are type A people. Scientists now say a lack of sleep is linked to chronic health problems, including Alzheimer's disease. And it's late. Oh no, my health, I better stay up and research this. So sometimes, you know, that type A type of personality knows that they need to sleep, but the brain doesn't stop working. So we're sometimes thinking about a million things, but a lot of times we're thinking about the fact that we should be sleeping, and that if we don't sleep, we're going to be tired the next day, and then that keeps us awake. And again, it becomes this vicious cycle. So we just want to try to have some methods to shut our brain off, and we'll talk about some of those things at the end of the presentation. So let's go to some of the implications around when you have a lack of sleep, what can happen. And you can see that there are a lot of things here. And there's probably even more. This is just what I found in just some of the research articles that I looked at. Sleep is a hot topic, so there could be even more than this. But it really affects our sympathetic nervous system activity, which is important because this is things like the adrenaline, cortisol, how we respond to stress. You're going to see that there are a lot of implications from a stress perspective when it comes to sleeping. It impairs glucose tolerance, so it has implications for metabolic issues and diabetes as well. Alters hormone levels, so that could be related to sex hormones, or it could be related to thyroid or cortisol. So there are a lot of implications from that perspective. A lack of sleep will increase inflammation, and this negatively impacts your immune system, so you're actually much more likely to catch a cold when you have a lack of sleep. Your cold lasts longer when you have a lack of sleep. It increases emotional reactivity and irritability, so you're more easily frustrated, you're more easily impatient, you're more easily just irritated by people. Maybe you have more moodiness, and I think that probably if you've ever gone a night without getting enough sleep, you've probably noticed it. If you haven't, I'm sure other people have noticed it on you. It reduces your attention and cognitive function, so we'll talk about the brain and what's happening there. Psychomotor speed, so your brain communicating with your muscles, and some of the things that you're trying to do, you just move slower. increased risk of accidents and injuries, so injuries in sports, accidents at work, injuries working out, things along those lines. When you have a lack of sleep, when you actually do tests on people, they are impaired as if they had drank too much alcohol, which is a pretty big deal, especially if you're going to work on a lack of sleep, because I'm pretty sure that most workplaces would not think it was cool to come to work with excessive alcohol consumption. But what the studies are showing is that coming to work with a lack of sleep is comparable to productivity, errors, judgment, and things along those lines. I think that's a pretty big deal. It can cause memory lapses or loss, so that could explain a lot, perhaps. It actually impairs moral judgment. So there is a lot of research to show that ethical decisions, moral types of decisions, that we tend to slip away from our values when we have a lack of sleep. If you already have ADD or ADHD types of symptoms, they worsen with a lack of sleep. You can actually develop tremors, body aches. You can drop your body temperature, which might make you feel like you can't regulate your body temperature as well. And that has implications from a nutrition perspective, so I'll talk about those. And then you can actually feel more overwhelmed, and it can lead to worsening of symptoms of depression. If you already have some sadness and that sort of thing going on, it can make it worse. I like what Karim says. That's probably why people say to sleep on it when it comes to big decisions. Absolutely. I guess there's a history of making bad decisions with a lack of sleep, and you really want to have your full brain available to you when you do that. But again, we have to come to work or live our day, and we sometimes can't put off decisions, and we have to make them, and we can't say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get enough sleep, so I think I might suck at making that decision. Sometimes we just have to do it. And so that can become a problem. And then decreased, sex drive is another thing, and that's probably related to hormonal changes that are occurring with the lack of sleep. So let's talk about just kind of health effects might occur then, especially if you're having chronic issues with a lack of sleep. So you can see increased body weight and obesity. We'll talk about what the mechanisms are from a nutritional perspective. So obviously the glucose intolerance, or we talked about that on the previous slide, so that can lead to diabetes, increased cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone. That can also lead to obesity. I'll show you that on a separate slide. So you lose sleep, you decrease melatonin. When you decrease melatonin, guess what? You lose sleep. So it becomes this vicious cycle. A lack of sleep can cause gut inflammation. So some people will say, I don't understand it. I used to not have all of these gut issues, and now all of a sudden I'm having all of these gut issues. Well, we have to look at a lot of different factors, and one of those is sleep. Adrenal fatigue is when you have so much cortisol in your system all the time, that you actually exhaust the adrenal system, and then your cortisol levels plummet, which isn't good. It can affect your thyroid, it can affect your bones, it can affect sex hormones, all kinds of things, and that is not good at all. Increased cardiovascular disease, increased risk of certain types of cancer. And then this one is one of the newer ones, is the risk of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. We know that stage 5 becomes extremely important to cleanse the brain and make sure that it gets rid of all of these elements that, when they accumulate in the brain, cause cognitive decline and are associated with Alzheimer's disease. So we don't want any of these things to happen. So let's talk about sleep, and specifically the brain and what's going on in the brain. So while we sleep, the connections between our brain cells, so all of these brain cells give all of these connections, they actually shrink. And this is something that is really important, because we cannot do this while we're awake. We would not be able to function. So during sleep, they shrink, and what this shrinking does is it allows the brain to decide what new things have occurred that need to be stored in memory, what kinds of things haven't been used or recalled in a really long time that we can then prune and get rid of, and then which are those memories that are important enough that we hold on to. They've been recalled, they've been used, and we need to hold on to those. So there's a lot of activity that's going on. So if you're not getting enough sleep, you have issues with making these new memories. You have issues pruning weak memories. So what happens is you run out of bandwidth, and you're not really keeping what's good and getting rid of the stuff that you don't need. And that can become an issue from a learning perspective, from a critical thinking perspective as well, each and every day. So some people think, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. You have to get enough sleep for all of this to work. Our brain synapses, so once again, how our brain and neurons, how brain cells and neurons connect, they reset while we're sleeping. And this cannot occur while we're awake. So when we miss out on that, you have all kinds of consequences. So let's take a look at some of those. Just by losing 2 hours of sleep, so let's say that you need 8 because of who you are, and you only got 6, or maybe you need 7 to perform well, and you only got 5. This will prevent your brain from turning information from your day into long-term memories. So you're not losing your mind, you're just not getting the sleep that you need. That's just 2 hours. Now, this is not even like staying up all night, which some people do. This is just losing 2 hours. Here's the other thing. When they do a functional MRI on somebody who's lost just 2 hours of sleep in one night, what happens is the brain exhibits what's called local sleep during the day. The brain actually shuts off certain parts of the brain to let it restore and recover, but you're awake. So it's almost like looking at your brain while you're awake, you're sitting in a meeting, you're at work, and when you do a functional MRI of your brain, it actually looks like you're asleep. So from a performance perspective and a cognitive perspective, obviously that's not going to be good. The parts of the brain that are demonstrating localized sleep are more of your cognitive functions, because we don't need cognitive function to survive. We need the amygdala. We need our emotional brain to survive when we're under threat and when we need to defend ourselves. So in part, that explains why we are the way we are. We're very emotional. We're very irritable. We've got all of these emotions driving things, and our rational brain isn't there to say, oh, calm down, oh, have perspective, because that part of your brain is actually trying to rest and recover from the lack of sleep it had the night before. And so now what's happening is we're living our life ruled by our emotional brain. And the thing is that when someone is experiencing localized sleep in their brain, they don't realize that. They don't say, oh, I'm feeling like part of my brain is asleep right now. And no, the person says, I am awake and I feel fine. They don't notice. But then mistakes can occur, injuries can occur, or maybe they're just explosive with how their personality is that day, but you don't consciously say, oh, I think part of my brain's asleep. So I think that's really important. It's almost like, some people can be under the influence of alcohol, and you see them on the cop shows, they're like, what are you talking about? I feel totally fine. And they're like stumbling all over the place, but they don't notice it themselves. It's a very similar scenario when we're lacking in sleep. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to participate on this one here in a second, but I want to talk about the impact that sleep has on our eating, because we talk about nutrition and we a lot of times put it in its own bucket. We just say, oh, nutrition's over here. The thing is that everything interconnects within the system, and your lack of sleep has implications for what you're doing with your nutrition. So the lack of sleep increases your appetite. So here's another one. You may not notice that you have an increased appetite. You don't notice the quantity that you eat is more. But what studies show is that when we get 2 hours less sleep in one night, we overeat 500 extra calories the next day without noticing. 500 calories is a lot. That adds up, if you did that every day, to a pound of fat that you could gain just from losing sleep and overeating based on what your body is doing to compensate. You actually store more food than you burn because of your lack of sleeping. You might use food as a coping mechanism. So it's like when people are tired, they eat more. They kind of mindlessly eat. They use it as a way to kind of feel better. The lack of sleep causes you to make poorer decisions. So when you're tired, you're not going to pick the salad over the fried food. It's just really hard to do that because your self-regulation center of your brain is not in full effect. So what I want you to do with my two lovely participants here is mark any of the things that you've noticed on this whiteboard that maybe has happened to you with lack of sleep and what it's done to your eating. And you can use, I think all of you have used the drawing tools before. So I will mark mine as well. Okay. And I think the ones that we notice are things like maybe we're more hungry, we eat more, we use food. It's really hard to tell whether we're using or storing food in a day right after we've lost sleep. I mean, the body's not like, hey, it's putting on all of this weight in just one day. That's something that can happen over time. And what can happen because of the way that eating is impacted by sleep, you are probably more likely to store that food in your midsection from a survival perspective because of cortisol. So now you start to store food around maybe your belly when you never really stored fat there before. So that's, I think, an interesting thing to notice. So thank you for marking that. Just show you the mechanism and what it can be happening kind of behind the scenes when it comes to nutrition. So you see that sleep deprivation occurs, and what happens is your appetite regulation system in your brain, you have leptin and ghrelin, and they work together to tell you, I'm hungry, I'm full, I'm hungry, I'm full. What will happen when you're sleep deprived is leptin, which tends to tell you, hey, stop eating, you're full, will be suppressed. And ghrelin, which tells you, hey, I'm hungry and you need to eat, will be increased. So now all of a sudden this is disrupted and now you are more hungry. But because you actually feel hungry, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels genuine. You go, but I really am hungry. That's those chemicals in your brain. So you're not feeling like, oh man, I'm overeating. You're just like, hey, I'm listening to my body and I'm responding to it. So that's the danger with it. And your body does this because when it senses any kind of survival, so sleep deprivation, it could be that you've got dangerous things going on in your environment. You've got to stay up to gather food or hunt. There's something that you need to do to survive. The body doesn't understand why you'd be losing sleep otherwise. And anytime you need to survive, I'm going to repeat this in all the programs that I teach, is that you want to eat more and store fat. That's a protective mechanism. If you're not sleeping as much, you have increased opportunities to eat. So if you're up till 2 o'clock in the morning, guess what? Your head's going to be in the refrigerator a whole bunch of times. So now you're just eating more. Your body temperature, I think I mentioned that earlier, gets disrupted. And when that happens, it actually slows your metabolism down. You're tired, so you don't do as much. You lay around, you don't feel like exercising. Now you've reduced your metabolism more. And then, of course, you're releasing things like cortisol, the stress hormone. The stress hormone contributes to this notion of increasing food intake and then storing that food, but then also reduces alertness and concentration, which then leads to poor decision making. So we've got all kinds of things. This is just from not getting enough sleep in one night. This is what's happening to you the next day. So then you get frustrated with yourself because you're trying to eat well and get your exercise in, and you think that your core problem is, oh, I just have really bad discipline with my food. Oh, I just, I'm just so lazy, I don't go work out. Your underlying problem could be a lack of sleep, and that's just messing everything else up. And instead of torturing yourself on, analyzing whether you're a lazy person or you have no discipline when it comes to food, sometimes it's really about addressing your sleep. And from there, you can make it easier on yourself to do other things. So we always want to look at our lives from a very holistic perspective. Okay, well, now let's talk about the impact of sleep specifically on exercise. So if you don't sleep enough, exercise performance is reduced. So obviously, if you're an athlete, I work with a lot of athletes, that's bad. Speed, endurance, strength, reaction time, that's bad. But even if you're not an athlete and you go to the gym and you don't work out as hard because you don't feel like it, because you have a lack of sleep, you put in your time to working out, but now you don't get the results that you're looking for. Well, that's, that kind of sucks, to put in the time and not get good results. You increase your risk of injury. So for athletes, of course, this is really important. Athletes who sleep at least 8 hours have a 60% reduction rate in injuries. That's good. But even if you're not a professional athlete or a high-level athlete, nobody wants to get injured in the gym. You get injured in the gym or doing a workout, guess what happens? Now you can't work out for a few weeks, you get out of your routine, and that messes you up. So we don't want anybody to get injured. The lack of sleep, of course, you feel too tired or unmotivated to exercise, or maybe the mindset about exercise is like, oh gosh, exercise is for these other people, not for me. It just impacts you in so many different ways. So again, if we go back to the whiteboard here, mark any of these that you think you have felt due to a lack of sleep. Okay, so we have all of these marks. I think the one that probably is most obvious to people is just like, I don't feel like exercising, I'm too tired or unmotivated. And a lot of times our mindset becomes, oh, sleep is more important, than exercising, right now. If I just, some people will hit the snooze button a few times and get that extra 30 minutes in. And okay, that might be the best thing that you can do. I don't know. You have to kind of look at, what it is. Maybe taking a nap is the best thing you can do, but maybe not. Maybe it's exercising in the day so that you will then feel sleepy that night and get a better night's sleep. So there's not just a straightforward answer on what you should do. You have to look at lots of different factors to see what's going to be the right thing for you to do. Sleep, take a nap, exercise. So we'll talk about some of those factors. So thank you for answering those questions. And now we're going to look at the impact of sleep on stress. So if you've attended my stress and resiliency program, you know lots of different aspects of stress that we talk about. So here's what happens. You get a lack of sleep, and that part of your brain that's in charge of self-control and self-regulation gets extremely disrupted. So this notion of having discipline, this notion of being able to filter yourself, this notion of being able to really push yourself to do certain things gets all messed up. So self-regulating your emotions, self-regulating responses, decisions, and that sort of thing. So you might respond to people in a way that is not aligned with who you are, just because you couldn't self-regulate that. You make bad decisions that day. You couldn't self-regulate. The lack of sleep, of course, reduces emotional stability. We have less cognitive thought. We're more ruled by that emotional brain, and it's in survival mode. It's going to go for the jugular. So that's not good. And then we don't have self-awareness. If we had self-awareness, we'd be able to self-regulate better, but we don't. So everything just goes out there. Of course, cognition. Cognition is an important part of thought management. It's an important part of self-awareness and perspective. And like I said, with that lack of sleep, stage 5 becomes compromised. Our cognition becomes compromised. That emotion takes over, so we don't think as well. And then a whole mindset about managing stress. Who cares? We get this who cares type of attitude when we have this lack of sleep. It's like an apathy. And I like this quote, the best bridge between despair and hope is a good night's sleep. There is a lot of truth to that. It's not just a kind of sounds good scenario. So mark the ones that you have felt in your life with a lack of sleep. And I am going to go ahead and mark all of them. And I think that this one becomes a vicious cycle, because what happens is, and you've marked several of them, is that we trigger all of this kind of stress response, and this stress response can make you feel wired when it's time to go to bed. So when it's time to go to bed and all of this stimulant stuff in your environment goes away, you're left with your own thoughts. And those thoughts can take over and really prevent you from sleeping. So when we trigger stress, it causes us not to sleep. And when we don't sleep, it then triggers stress. So you can see that there are a lot of vicious cycles that are built into this kind of sleep concept. And the idea is to figure out sort of the root cause for me. What's my underlying issue, and how can I work on it? We're going to talk about some tips. So thank you for answering that. So I just want to talk really quickly, because we're in a work setting, and a lot of the people that we talk with are also at work. There's some really great studies on the impact that sleep has on work. And so I just want you to take a look at this. Reduce task performance. So especially if you're a task-oriented employee, maybe in manufacturing or production, very task-oriented, that performance, productivity, those sorts of things go down. People miss work. People, again, because you get sick more often, because your sickness lasts longer, because maybe you're so tired that you maybe can't go to work, or maybe you're so overwhelmed that because of a lack of sleep and feel so stressed that you need to take a mental health day and not make it to work. Workplace injuries and accidents occur with much more frequency. Car accidents, reduced productivity, a lack of creative thinking and innovation. Remember that you need your cognitive brain for that. Stage 5 in order to be able to do this. Inflexible thinking, that's stage 5 of sleep. Impaired communication, stage 5 of sleep. All of these things, unwilling to try new approaches, impaired teamwork, when your emotions have taken over, that's not good. Unethical behavior, emotions don't consider ethics. Our cognition considers ethics. And then just unhappiness. So you don't like your job, all kinds of things can begin to happen. In fact, one study talked about that sleep, a lack of sleep has such a big impact on work that companies would be better off getting their employees to come to work and paying them to sleep for a few hours on the job, and then having them work the rest of the time. That's how impactful sleep was on work, that this study literally suggested have your employees come in and pay them to sleep at work for some of that time, and you'll actually get better results. So that's crazy. I mean, that just seems so counterintuitive to us to pay someone to sleep, but that's how critical it is to from a performance perspective. So the three main sleep issues are not being able to fall asleep, not being able to stay asleep, or waking up too early. So what I want to do is see if you suffer from one or more of these on a frequent basis. So if you do, mark it, and I will mark mine, this one. And maybe you have no issues at all. And okay, I think we have all three marked. So, and sometimes you can have all of them. You know, you can't fall asleep, you finally fall asleep, you can't stay asleep, and then you wake up too early. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do. But what we want to do is first do a little couple of quizzes here. I'm going to try out the polls. So first, I'm going to see if this works. So I've never done a poll before, so bear with me. I'm going to go to the first poll and see if you can answer this. So if I have to do something. Oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to end voting. Okay, so with our lovely participants, we have 5 to 6 hours of sleep, which obviously is less than what is recommended. So I'm glad that you're here. And I see that Karim put sleep pods are becoming popular. Yes, unfortunately not in our setting, but in some companies, especially the companies that they have a lot of expectations around performance and innovation, a lot of your Silicon Valley types of companies are putting sleep pods. They're realizing the value that people will have their best ideas sometimes when they're falling asleep or during their sleep. And so they actually let them sleep on the job to take advantage of that. So let's see here. Can you guys see the results on the screen from the poll? Okay, perfect. Yay, I did a survey. I'm so excited. Okay, so here's the other one, thank you, that we're going to do. I'm going to show you the slide first, and then I'm going to have you answer the poll based on it. So now I'm going to be super fancy here. So here's what I want you to do. Go through these 10 questions and kind of mark for yourself how many you say yes to, and then write that down, and I'm going to give you a poll on that. So do you need an alarm clock to wake up on time? Do you use the snooze button on a regular basis? Do you have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning? Do you feel sluggish in the afternoon? Do you get sleeping in meetings and lectures? Hopefully not this one. Do you get drowsy after heavy meals or when you're driving? Do you need a nap to get through your day? Do you fall asleep while doing activities that are relaxing? Do you feel like you have to sleep in on weekends? And do you fall asleep in less than 5 minutes after going to bed? So keep track of how many you say yes to. If you can just say done in the chat box, that I know that you're done with the questions, and then I can move over to the poll, then that would be awesome. Okay, so let's move over to the poll, and then mark how many you said yes to. Okay, I think we have everybody in there. I'm going to see how this goes. And share. So hopefully you can see that it's 6 to 8 that you answered yes to. And obviously the more questions you answer yes to, the more likely you are to be sleep deprived. So in yesterday's group, I think we had, 3 or 4 people. And you would have said sometimes to a lot of questions. Okay, yeah, and they're not, you know, it's kind of more often than not, maybe. So you have to use some judgment. They're very yes or no questions on this. But we had like 4 people that had 9s or 10s yesterday in yesterday's group. And the majority of people had 6 or more. And this aligns with what you see in surveys that are out there around sleep. So that the Healthy People surveys, when they survey people, sleep is one of the things that they're tracking on Healthy People. And the majority of people are sleep deprived. And when you look at it from the behavioral youth surveillance system and you look at the results there, it is shocking to see how many teenagers and kids are also sleep deprived, which has huge implications for emotional control, for learning, for all kinds of things. And so that's why, to me, this is such an important program. I think everybody needs it. I'm a little disappointed we only had 2 people on the webinar today, only because I think that, again, it's valuable for every disease and condition out there if you have it. If you're trying to prevent a disease or condition, sleep is super important. If you're trying to lose weight, sleep is important. If you're trying to manage your stress, sleep is important. To me, this is like everybody needs this program because of the implications that sleep has. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. So we know that maybe we all could benefit from getting more sleep. So let's take a look then at just a couple of things of what can lead to sleep issues. Lots of different things. Stress is a really big one. And we know that with the world that we're living in today, we have a lot more stress. That's why the stress and resiliency program, I think, is good. And that leads to sleep issues. Overcommitment, which I think is related to stress. We have a lot of people who are overweight or obese. That can also lead to sleep issues, sleep apnea, things along those lines. A lack of exercise. We'll talk about some of the things that you can do to get better sleep, and exercise is one of them. Of course, if you're a parent of babies, infants, toddlers, that's going to, lead to sleep issues, which you may or may not be able to control all of them, but you want to try to control as much as possible. Financial concerns actually it's a really big category. So some of the programs that Bryce is doing, you may not think about financial issues and sleep and health being correlated, but they are. People with financial concerns have stress. People with financial concerns and stress lack sleep. Those people are more likely to have emotional issues, mental health issues, and obesity, diabetes, all kinds of things. So we're really interconnected from this perspective. Having to use the bathroom during the night, the recommendation is if you wake up and you feel like you have to go to the bathroom, close your eyes and try to go to sleep and don't go to the bathroom. That is literally the recommendation. Once you get up and you get your heart rate up, just walking to the bathroom and going, you've completely taken yourself out of the entire sleep cycle and you have to start all over again. And then the issue would be looking at how you can cut back on your fluid or anything that would be causing you to use the bathroom, or addressing any medical issues. If you're a man, potential prostate issues. If you're a female who's had kids, a prolapse, bladder, or something along those lines of why you're needing to use the bathroom. The brain should be set up so that you do not need to go to the bathroom in the night. Bad mattress, bad environment, unfamiliar environment. So if you go travel and you sleep in a hotel, your brain stays half awake on purpose in order to deal with an unfamiliar environment in which there could be danger. It's a survival mechanism we have. So in the studies, first night you sleep in a hotel, if you're gone, you get your brain is more awake than asleep. The next night that you stay there, the brain relaxes a little bit more, allows you to sleep a little bit better. And the more nights in a row you stay in a hotel, typically the more sleep cycles you go through, the better sleep that you get. But if you're traveling all the time and changing environments all the time, you're going to lose out on some sleep because of that. And so you want to try to implement as many things as possible to get better sleep. Noisy environments, we'll talk about what you can do about that. And then, of course, your diet, leaky gut, food intolerances that you may not know about disrupts your gut microbiome, which messes up melatonin, messes up some of the other neurochemicals in our brain, and that can lead to sleep issues as well. And of course, there are probably a million other things as well. I'm just going to quickly run through the couple of slides so we can get to the recommendations. You're going to see some of these things under recommendations. Caffeine disrupts circadian rhythm. Shift work disrupts the circadian rhythm, working night shift. Smoking cigarettes, magnetic field exposure. So these are all of the plugged in to outlets in your bedroom. So we'll talk about that in recommendations. Exposure to bright lights or the blue lights during night hours. That'll show up in the recommendations. Jet lag, of course, and then as your melatonin decreases with age, it messes up the circadian rhythm and the biological clock and how it's functioning. And then there are new sleep disorders. It's estimated that 50 to 70 million adults in the US have a chronic sleep disorder. So there can be insomnia, there can be sleep-related breathing disorders like obstructive sleep apnea, hypersomnia, where your brain is just disrupted and maybe you get too much sleep. You want to sleep too much. circadian rhythm sleep disorders, parasomnias. You can have narcolepsy types of things, sleep-related movement disorders where your body twitches and moves too much. And then, of course, shift work sleep disorder is actually its own disorder in jet lag as well. So there are lots of things here. And if you think that you're suffering from a sleep disorder, it's really important to go to the doctor and just get it checked out, because having a sleep disorder increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, all kinds of issues. And so you want to get that taken care of. Garim says that time change is hard on sleep patterns. Absolutely. I have traveled across multiple time zones many, many times, and jet lag is a killer. Some people are disrupted just from daylight savings time, by just 1 hour. And so there are recommendations that you can follow if you're going to be changing time zones. It will give you recommendations for what to start doing 2 days before travel, while you're traveling, and once you arrive, to try to reset the time zones as quickly as possible. So there are some things that you can do for that. Okay, so let's go to sleep recommendations. I'm just going to pull this up on the whiteboard so that we can just already be there. So here are some of the things that are recommended. So from an environmental perspective, having the darkest room possible, so blackout curtains, making sure that computer screens, anything that could be reflective of light is shut down, that you don't have any night lights in the room. So things along those lines, or wearing an eye mask. For example, I have these little built-in windows in my bedroom that I don't know who built the house and decided that was a good idea. And so there's a street light outside that reflects into these little square tiled things. And so I can either wear an eye mask or turn my back so that my face is not facing that wall to block out any light that's coming in. Some people do really well with white noise playing in the background from an environmental perspective. So you can get apps, or you can, plug in actual machines that play white noise. I don't like white noise. It's disruptive to my sleep. But what helps me is earplugs. And I know it sounds super weird. Even if there's no noise in my room, if I put those soft earplugs in my ears, it actually shuts down my own thoughts for some reason. I've heard a couple of other people tell me that they also use earplugs to shut off their brain. Some people, it's not going to work for them. They say, I block out all sound and my brain goes into overdrive. So you have to experiment and see what's going to work for you. What they recommend to decrease electromagnetic frequencies in your room, these are things you cannot see, but they actually have an effect on our brain, is to unplug anything you're not using. And if you do have things plugged in, make sure that your outlets are all grounded. The blue light that's coming off of your electronic devices, so if you're having tablets, phones, computers, TV, you are not supposed to really do that in the hours before bed, because what happens is it stimulates that pathway that I talked about in the biological clock of the eye. The eye sees this light, it gets confused, and it starts to think that you're in daylight hours, and now it disrupts all of the chemicals that are going on. If you can expose yourself to bright lights in the morning time and spend time outside during daylight hours, it helps to reinforce the brain that yes, it's on the right track, it's releasing the chemicals when it's supposed to, and that will help you with sleeping later on in the day. From an emotional and psychological perspective, decreased stress. You saw how many times stress came up as an issue from a sleep perspective. Some of the things that we talked about in the stress and resiliency program is to be positive and be grateful. So maybe doing a gratefulness exercise before going to bed, maybe thinking about all the positive things that happened in your day. That can have a relaxing effect on you and help you to sleep. Seeing a therapist and doing cognitive behavioral therapy so that you can work out some of the issues that might be getting you to stay up at night and kind of thinking through it. So therapy could be helpful. Relaxing music, mindfulness. So we talked about that in stress and resiliency, relaxation, meditation, and then you can use apps. You can have mindfulness apps. There are relaxation apps, there are meditation apps, and there are actually sleeping apps. And so test these out. I mean, I know that sometimes we talk about these things and we go, yeah, that sounds really good, and then we don't do them. So what I want you to do is just mark anything on here that you think you might try because you think it could be helpful to you. Sorry, I used it. Instead of using my pencil. Okay, lots of stuff. And you don't have to try it all at once. So you can try, some of them out, see how they work for you. And sometimes just doing one or two of these can make a big enough difference that you don't even have to, do anything else. So it's really just starting somewhere and seeing what works. Okay, so here's the last set of recommendations that I want to show you. And they have to do with physical and then just kind of general sleep hygiene. So eliminating sleep disruptors, so caffeine, the recommendation not after 2 p.m. Alcohol will cause you to fall asleep, but then wake up after the alcohol wears off within the system. Diet pills typically have some kind of stimulant, so they work very similar to caffeine. And then large meals are like alcohol. They cause you to fall asleep because you become sleepy. Your body processes the large meal. You wake back up. There's an arousal factor that occurs afterwards. So those are some of the things from a diet perspective that you can look at. Exercising during the day has been shown to promote deeper sleep. So you're less likely to jump out of your sleep cycles, and you're just more likely to stay cycling through 2, 3, 4, and 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's really nice. Implementing breathing exercises before bed. So if you ever do yoga, you know that there are certain breaths that serve different purposes. There's breathing that helps keep you alert. There's breathing that helps you to relax. There's actually breathing that can help you sleep. So you might want to look that up. And so that could be helpful. So Di says when her head hits the pillow, she's out. Wow, that's really good. So then it's a matter of just making sure that you're getting high quality sleep from that perspective, and that you're going through all those sleep cycles correctly and not waking up in the night. So again, don't overeat in the evening or eat heavy food. So a lot of fatty fried foods can also have that same effect, that arousal effect later. Being overweight is extremely sleep disruptive. In fact, a lot of people with sleep apnea, losing the weight fix their sleep apnea. So carrying extra weight is a burden from a sleep perspective. And then this is one of the things that I really trying to specialize more in is if you have gut issues, fix them. Making sure you have good gut bacteria versus bad gut bacteria so that you can make the melatonin and all of the right hormones. I have a program that's on the gut microbiome, serotonin, really important piece of this as well. If you don't have a good gut, it affects your serotonin. Food sensitivity, so if you have gluten or other types of issues, that is going to mess up your gut, but it's also going to mess up your sleep. And then don't exercise or elevate your heart rate 2 to 3 hours before bed unless you're used to it and you're able to still sleep. Okay. Create bedtime routines and follow them. So just like we do for little kids, you have a routine. If you can do that for yourself, it's better. The recommendation is not to sleep in on weekends and to always stay within 1 hour of your normal waking time if you can. The recommendation is that you use your bed for sleeping only. No reading, no TV, nothing else. Just for sleeping is an association or psychological association. This might seem silly to you, but if it's possible or necessary, you may need to sleep alone. So if you have a partner that's kicking you in the bed, snoring, hogging the blanket, that's very sleep disruptive. And some marriages stay together because they sleep in separate bedrooms. So it's just something for you to consider if that's an issue for you. If you have really bad sleep issues, one of the things that you can do is actually sleep deprive yourself for several days to reset your sleep cycle. So that's another thing. And then if you are awake and you can't fall asleep, the recommendation is don't stay in bed, get out of bed, maybe write down the things you're stressing about or thinking about, maybe do something really, really boring like reading a book in a chair, but then when you get sleepy, going back to the bed. I'm almost done. I know I'm almost out of time here, so let me just show you the next slides that I have here. And because one's on napping, which I think is important. So really quickly, sleep aids, sleeping pills, they can cause all kinds of problems, addiction, dizziness, memory loss, other side effects. You can get rebound insomnia. It's a real issue, so it's preferable that you use all of these different techniques instead, or maybe natural types of things. I put some on here, cherry juice, chamomile extract, things like that. And there are some people in which melatonin supplementation is necessary, especially if you're aging or if you have gut issues where your melatonin may not be being produced. So you can talk to your doctor, you know, if you have access to a dietitian or, you know, somebody that works with supplements, that might be something to talk to them about on whether melatonin would be good for you and what the dosage would be. And then the last slide is all about napping. So let's talk about that because we all, I think, are interested in that. So just so you know, when we turn 5, we go from a biphasic sleep pattern, which we might need to nap in the day, to monophasic, in which all of our sleep should occur at night. That's just how we're built. Napping in the daytime, however, may be recommended for those who do not sleep enough at night. Older adults, because remember that those older adults have issues with the melatonin, or people who have sleep disorders where they're not getting good sleep. If you do nap during the day, this is super important. The science has shown the optimal nap time is only 10 to 30 minutes. So there are actually napping apps where you can set that time and it wakes you up. And so try to stick with that. I have a lot of people that will take a 2-hour nap. Really, that's not appropriate, and it very much messes up the sleep cycles that you have in the biological clock. The only exception is people who work night shifts because it's so disruptive to the biological clock that people who work nights may benefit from a 40-minute to 2-hour nap just to have something aligned with the natural circadian rhythm to reduce the risk of disease and early death. So that would be the only exception. The optimal time for a nap is in the afternoon hours. If you're a normal, you have a normal day, and for shift workers, it's the halfway point between their typical waking hours. So if you're ever teaching this program to people who work night shifts, that's a really important point to make. And so, I don't know what happened to my little slide. It doesn't show up, but there's a cute little saying, good night, sleep tight, wake up bright in the morning light to do what's right with all your might. That's what it says. And so it's really about getting a good night's sleep because you're going to make better decisions and you're going to be able to perform at your best and all of the things that are really important to you and matter. So thank you for joining me. If you were unable to join me live and have joined in through the recording, thank you very much. I hope that you found this to be helpful. So does anybody have any questions? Thank you. Yes, people do not realize how important it is. I think that's why there's not anybody on my webinar. And it's, I think you see all of the interconnections that it has within our system and how critical it's one of the most critical factors to being healthy and well. And again, to me, it's just as important as nutrition and exercise, but we just don't talk about it. It's just not mainstream to talk about sleep. And it's been one of these badges of honor of not getting sleep and being kind of an awesome person because I can survive on less sleep. And we really need to break that and really address this just as much as we address nutrition and exercise, in my opinion, and stress. So hopefully this was helpful to you personally and hopefully professionally. So if you decide to teach this program, of course, as always, I will send you the recording. I will send you the slides. I will send you, there is a beautiful little handout here. I'll just show it to you really quickly. It has a lot of the little, the stages and the number of hours of sleep, and it has all of these things that we talked about, the assessment, the naps, all of this stuff is actually in the handout, and people can take that with them. And thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact me. Thank you. Thank you both for attending.